Meet Cindy. She has a fresh agenda in front of her as she's doing her best to keep the leadership meeting on track. But already, the conversation has veered to side comments and subtle jabs between department heads. One leader is frustrated because marketing didn't deliver materials on time. Another is annoyed because sales teams keep overpromising to clients. The tension is quiet but sharp, and Cindy can feel the energy spiraling into another round of finger pointing. As the company's COO, Cindy is proud of what they've been able to accomplish over the last 5 years. But lately, it feels like the trust is wearing thin. Departments are guarding their own priorities rather than working together. People are hesitant to share openly, afraid the honesty would backfire. Projects are getting done, but that spark of "we're in this together" is fading. Driving home that night, Cindy replays the meeting in her mind and keeps wrestling with the same question that's been nagging her for months. How do I get them to trust one another? Today, I'm speaking with Mike Robbins, keynote speaker, author, and coach, who has spent over 2 decades helping leaders and teams to build trust, foster collaboration, and elevate performance. Mike's worked with top organizations like Google, Microsoft, Wells Fargo, the San Francisco Giants, and his books, one of which is We're All in This Together, have been translated into 15 languages. I'm looking forward to hearing how Mike would help someone like Cindy to restore connection, to strengthen her team's culture, and to rebuild trust. And if you would like some personal help, some free coaching on how to work through your specific challenge, you can submit your story to Unstuck, where an expert guest and I will review it and be able to provide you with some advice. It can remain anonymous if you'd like. You don't even have to put all your contact info in, but we will look at it, we'll read it, and we'll be able to help you to work through your unique challenge. Go to jayabbasi.me/podcast and you could submit your story today. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Jay Abbasi, and welcome to Unstuck. Real people, real stories, real solutions. While the details are changed to protect anonymity, what you just heard is based on a true story of challenges that come up in the real world. And we discuss how to navigate these environments with practical tips to help you get unstuck and build a more fulfilling, impactful, and balanced life and career. So Mike, you have written 5 books. They've been translated into 15 languages. And there is a story I want to hear about you getting drafted by the New York Yankees, because I told you I'm from New Jersey. So I became immediately interested in hearing that story. So tell me about it.
Well, I got drafted by the Yankees in 1992, which was my senior year in high school. Same year as another guy named Derek Jeter got drafted, but I didn't end up signing with the Yankees because I had a few months earlier been offered an opportunity to play baseball in college at Stanford, which was about an hour from where I grew up in Oakland. So I ended up saying no to the Yankees, which was hard to do, but I went to Stanford and played baseball there, and then was fortunate enough to get drafted 3 years later after my junior year by the Kansas City Royals. So I did ultimately sign a pro contract at that point in 95 with the Royals.
Yeah. It must have been hard to say no to the Yankees.
It was, although I try to remind people, I mean, in 92, and if you're a Yankee fan, and you're probably younger than I am, but they were in the middle of a pretty rough stretch between 81 and 96. They didn't go to the World Series, which, as you know, for the Yankees is like, if you don't win the World Series, it's a terrible year. So they weren't quite they're the greatest, professional sports franchise in the history of sports in terms of how many championships they've won and all of that. But they were in a little bit of a lull. But it was not lost on me that I was drafted by the New York Yankees, which was a pretty big deal. And even though I grew up in Oakland and was an A's fan, my dad had grown up in Connecticut and was a huge Yankee fan. And so, everyone knows about the Yankees, of course. So it was a big deal.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was the year 2000 when it was a decision that everyone had to make in my school. Are you a Met
Oh,
fan or are you a
right.
Yankee fan because
Yeah.
of the Subway Series? And
Yeah.
all of my friends were Yankees fans, and I wasn't too big of a baseball fan at that point.
Okay.
And so I made the terrible decision of becoming a Met fan because
Ooh.
we haven't won. I mean, we've been better lately, but
Yes.
it's been a rough go, Mike,
Yeah.
since I've made that decision.
That's tough. That is tough. I feel for people. I mean, being an A's fan, although the A's had some success, and we did play the Giants in '89 in the Bay Bridge World Series and won, but that was the year of the earthquake. And now sadly, our A's have moved, and it's a whole thing. So I understand being on the wrong side of the local rivalry, if you will. So it can be rough. It's like being a White Sox fan in Chicago, or an Angel fan down in Southern California.
Yeah, yeah, and so you did play professional baseball with the Kansas
I
City Royals,
did.
but there was then an injury
Yeah.
that occurred. Tell me
Yeah.
about what happened.
Yeah, so I mean, I signed in '95 after my junior year at Stanford, and the way it works in pro baseball, as many people listening and watching know, is you got to go in the minor leagues, and there's a bunch of levels of the minor leagues. You got to kind of work your way up to get to the big leagues. And I was a pitcher working my way up, trying to get to the big leagues. I mean, actually, being drafted by the Royals and signing with them is actually better than the Yankees in terms of getting there, just because the Royals, small market team, not very good at the time. I would have had a chance to get to the big leagues a lot faster than if I was with the Yankees, who were going to sign, lots of free agents and harder to get there. But unfortunately for me, I went out to pitch my third season still in the minors, and I threw one pitch, tore ligaments in my elbow, and that was pretty much the end of my career. I was 23 at the time, and 2 years, three surgeries later, I was forced to retire from baseball. So after starting at 7 and having that be, the be all and end all for me, it was pretty devastating for my career to come to an end that way.
Yeah, and I imagine, Mike, so many people have that experience of a passion that they grow up
Yeah.
with, and then something happens that's unfortunate, random, at times
Yeah.
outside of their control, that forces a big change. I guess, what did you learn from that experience? Because I know you talk about change a lot now. You went through a lot of change. So what did you learn
Yeah.
from that?
I mean, I learned a lot. It was painful. It was hard. It was disorienting. And especially at such a young age, the first book that I wanted to write, I never wrote this book, but I wanted to write a book called What Happens When You Don't Make It. Because I feel like there's a lot of people in life, not just in sports, but in other areas where, especially things like that, where you start when you're young. But for me, it was, the painful part of it was just, I thought that's who I was. It was my identity. It's how I related to myself. So I really went through a period of like, who am I if I'm not a baseball player? Will people still love me? Will people still care about me? Can I still be successful and happy in life? And I mean, it was a good process to go through because it did teach me a lot. And the biggest regret that I had, and I actually talk about this in my work, especially in the first, 10, 15 years I was doing this work, is that, oops, I forgot to appreciate it. Like, I was so focused on trying to make it. I wasn't enjoying the process as much. I wasn't acknowledging myself. I was focused a lot on thinking I wasn't good enough, or comparing myself to people around me, or holding my breath, hoping that I wouldn't screw it up. And then it ended abruptly. And it was like, oh man, I was actually pretty good, and that was fun. And I mean, it's not like I had no fun at all, but I could have enjoyed the experience a lot more, instead of just, hoping and praying one day I'd get to, pitch for the Royals or pitch at Yankee Stadium or whatever, because that didn't ultimately happen. But that didn't mean there weren't still a lot of wonderful, exciting things that happened along the way, and a lot of growth and learning in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. The journey unfolds as it does. And oftentimes it's the hardest moments that then wake us up to the best lessons that we then learn
Yeah,
later.
for sure.
So you, of course, had this happen. Your baseball career is coming to an end, and
Yeah.
you then transition into the next chapter. Talk to me about that discovery period of finding what's next.
Well, I come home. It's 1998 when I get hurt and I'm done with baseball, and I'm 25, 26 years old, trying to figure out what do I do. And I got a job working for an internet company. It was the late 90s .com boom time out here in the San Francisco, Silicon Valley area where I grew up. And, it was interesting, but I didn't know what the heck I wanted to do outside of baseball. I hadn't really thought about a plan B. I started doing a lot of therapy and a lot of personal growth work, just trying to like sort myself out and figure out how do I heal, not just physically heal, but like mentally, emotionally heal from this. And then how do I create kind of what's next? And I didn't really know what was next. But, learned a few things selling internet advertising for a few different companies over a year or two. Then the dot-com bubble bursts and I lose my job. And I'm like, oh God, now I'm out of work. But I wasn't super heartbroken about being out of work. I just had to figure out how to pay the rent. But it was an interesting time because it was an opportunity for me to then reevaluate again, like, what do I really want to do? And I had a mentor of mine ask me, if you could do anything and you weren't worried about paying the bills, and what would you do? And I was like, well, I would speak and I would write and I would try to inspire people. And he's like, cool, you should do that now. And I'm like, now? This is 25 years ago. I'm 26 years old. There's no podcast, there's no blogs, there's no YouTube, there's no social media, there's none of that, right? It's like, what? Is that even a job? Like, how do you do that, right? Um, but he's like, well, you could wait till you figured it out, or you could just figure it out now. And I was like, okay. And I happened to meet my now wife, Michelle, right around the same time. And she's a couple years older than me. She's really smart. She started a staffing company and was really interested in life coaching at the time, which was starting to become a bigger thing. And so with her encouragement and us kind of doing some coaching training together, I decided I was going to start my business in 2001. And I didn't really know how one became a professional speaker or an author or a coach, but I was like, I'll figure it out or I'll go broke trying.
Yeah.
And that's
Well,
kind of what I did.
Mike, that's powerful to pull from, because I know a lot of people who are listening have ideas, dreams, things like that, and they haven't had that mentor ask them that question.
Yeah.
But you got asked that question, but then you just said, I just will figure it out. So when
Yeah.
you look back and you figure out and you think, what were the levers that you pulled that made it happen, right? That are available to anybody, right? What are the levers?
I mean, I think it was having support, Michelle's support and people around me who were supportive of me. I remember Michelle and I had just started dating and I went to a wedding. So this is like December of 2000. I hadn't started my business yet. And I was embarrassed because the wedding I was going to, it's ironic you were talking about the New York Mets, a friend of mine from Stanford who I'd played baseball with, who's a year younger than me, he had already made it to the big leagues. He was pitching for the Mets. And I was going to see a bunch of my buddies that I played ball with. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to go to this wedding. Like, friends of mine were still playing ball. Some had stopped, but they were all like doing well already. And I was like, I lost my job. I feel like a loser. And Michelle gave me a pep talk and she's like, you did lose your job, but you're not a loser. You're starting a business. Like, you have a passion, you could really do this. And she's like, go tell your friends at this wedding what you're up to. And I was like, I don't know. They're going to laugh at me and think this is stupid. Right. And I go to the wedding and I was like, I love these guys. I mean, we're still friends to this day. We have a great group, chat with all my Stanford buddies. And I start somewhat, sheepishly saying, I think I want to start speaking. And they were like, Robbins, that's awesome. You'll be great at that. And they were all super supportive. And so I was like, oh, wow. Like, these guys who know me pretty well, who played with me at Stanford, they were just like, you can do this. This is absolutely who you are. And so anyway, that gave me a little bit of confidence. Like, I have people in my corner. But the other thing that I did was I really leveraged relationships that I had, not just those, but like, I started my business here in the Bay Area where I grew up and where I still live, and just started reaching out to people I knew from school or baseball or from the couple years I worked. And I found an organization called the National Speakers Association that I'm still a member of today. That's a, professional trade association, and just amazingly found mentors and people who wanted to help me. And, like, I just listened to a lot of people who were smarter than me and had been further down the path than me at that time. And when I look back on it now, this first couple of years were pretty lean. But I learned a ton and I got a lot of help. And over the years, I've been really fortunate to get a lot of help, and then, try as best I can to pay it forward and help others, especially now that I'm not a kid now and I've been doing this for 25 years. So I actually think I have some things I can share with others that might be helpful. I mean, with my work, but also just with other people who are interested in doing this at various stages.
I think that what you shared, for anyone listening, doesn't just apply to the year 2000, or it
Right.
applies today. Like, I think that
Yeah.
what oftentimes people can get confused is, well, in today's world, you need the big social media presence, you need the big website, you need all these kind of things.
Right.
But I disagree with that. I think that if you have one, great support around you, which is what you had there, Mike, and two, you networked, you
Yeah.
did outreach, you connected with people, you put yourself out there. Those are the things that get anyone to a new career, a new level, whatever it is that they're looking for. It's just that so often people just don't do it. They don't have the fear, courage. They don't have it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think social media. I mean, again, you and I being able to have this conversation on this podcast and people being able to listen to it, whether they're listening to the whole thing, audio, watching the video, seeing a reel or a clip or something. I mean, it's amazing all the things we can do with technology, and it's not just about doing this. It's like you're looking for a job, you're networking with people, being on LinkedIn or being on Instagram or all the things. I still, now maybe it's because I'm 51 and I'm a Gen Xer and I look at things a different way, or I grew up at a certain time or whatever, but I also look at all these technology tools and platforms as blessings and curses. The blessing part is we can absolutely leverage them and use them in all these wonderful ways. The curse is, I think sometimes we can rely on them too much and forget that at the end of the day, and again, I don't mean to sound like old school about this, but most everything we do comes down to people and relationships. And you could have a million followers on Instagram, but like, do you have someone who could drive you to the airport or take care of your dog or your cat or your house when you go on vacation? You know what I mean? And like, just on a human level, those things are important, but also in terms of business, like so many of the leaders and teams that I work with and so many of the other people I talk to who are trying to figure out how to do this business that I do, I will say to them, look, it comes down to like looking people in the eye and shaking their hand and being in actual sharing physical space with them. That's how you build relationships, and that's how you can be successful at whatever it is you're trying to be successful at.
Yeah. Everything else are supporting tools. You know, like
Yep.
social media is a supporting tool, branding is a supporting tool, but it can't replace human
Right.
connection. It can't replace relationships. I couldn't agree more, Mike. And when you got into speaking, you could have talked about different things, and now you've written many books on different subjects. What drove you to hone in on the topics that you care about now, the things that you really focus on, change, culture, leadership? What made you want to talk about those things?
Well, it evolved. I mean, there's a couple early on, I looked at my experience as an athlete and I loved baseball. I loved the game. I loved competing, but I also was just fascinated by people. And I noticed a couple things, Jay, when I was playing, especially by the time I got to college and I was playing professionally. On the individual level, I noticed it wasn't always the most talented people that were the most successful. Now, obviously, having talent, in sport, it's like, I wasn't blessed. I'm barely 6 feet tall. I didn't throw that hard. I wasn't physically blessed. I worked really hard. I'm a decent athlete, but like I played with some guys who were like 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", and like 240. You know what I mean? Like that, those kinds. So it was nice if you had a great arm or you could run or you could, talent mattered, but it wasn't the only thing because I saw guys with a lot of talent who didn't necessarily turn it into success. And
Yeah.
then I noticed it wasn't always the most successful people that seemed the happiest and the most fulfilled. So like I played with some guys who were incredibly talented, incredibly successful, and they were like miserable most of the time. They would beat themselves up and like never good enough, never satisfied. And I was like, well, I mean, again, I was trying not to be judgmental, but I was like, how do you take any talent that you might have and turn it into success? Like, how does that work? And if you have any success, how do you actually turn it into some fulfillment or some happiness or some joy? And I was like, that's what got me initially just kind of reading books and talking to people and even going to therapy. Even earlier in my life before I got hurt, I was just like, I want to understand that. And then on a team and group level, I noticed it wasn't always the most talented teams. Like again, I'd play them, we'd have all these great players and like the team would underperform because I don't know, the coach was weird or the best player had a bad attitude or whatever the heck it was. It was just weird. And then I was on some other teams where, we had decent talent, but it was something about the mixture and the chemistry of the guys together. We would like overachieve and I would play better. We would all play better. We would beat teams that had better players than we did. It's like, well, how the heck does that work? That doesn't make sense. And I erroneously thought these things were related to sports. And then as soon as I got, baseball ends and I get my first real job and I'm like in the real world, I'm like, oh no, this is like, these are human things. So those things were always interesting to me. And then when I started thinking about what do I have to share and teach, I was like, I don't know, maybe I can talk about some of these things. And I just started moving in the direction of like, what are some topics and themes and ideas that are interesting to me and sometimes challenging for me. And I would imagine if they're interesting and challenging to me, they're probably interesting and challenging to other people.
Yeah. And it is definitely interesting, and it's a challenge for many
Yeah.
people to be able to have high performing teams, to
Yep.
be able to have that healthy balance of performance and happiness.
Yep.
I'm curious to get your take on the team component, Mike, because
Mhm.
you've worked with so many teams now. You've done
Yep.
the work in researching and writing about this. What are the common pitfalls that you see where these are the common reasons why teams are underperforming? What are the things that often stand out, the things that we should be mindful of as it's a sign that we're moving in the wrong direction in team performance?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing that's important to acknowledge is that teamwork is actually really hard. Collaborating with other humans is difficult. And the funny thing about it is, even though we think of it in this really positive context, and most people, teams, leaders and people, we got a team, we got to work together, and yeah, but like we're not actually trained all that well to work in teams. Like I often ask people, what's teamwork called when we're in school? Cheating, right? It's like we're not really encouraged to collaborate. And even if you get I mean, I know education has evolved in the last few generations, thankfully, but like group projects were usually a mess when I was in school, because it was like, oh, he's not doing his work, or she's taken over, or this is how come I'm with these people, or so it was like hard to really. There's not a lot of incentive for teaming and partnering and collaborating when you're young, even if you play team sports like I did. In my judgment, it's getting worse, not better. It's like, are you going to be on the varsity team? Are you going to start? Are you going to get a scholarship? Are you going, it's like we're so obsessed in our society with like individual performance, right? Whose team is it? Is it Shaq or Kobe's team? Is it who's the best quarterback in the league? Or, I mean, all that. It's like, again, and it's such a weird thing that actually, and then you get your first job and they say work in a team, and you're like, okay, well, why? Like, what's my incentive? It's not like we're getting a group paycheck, we're not getting group promoted. Usually my joke when I'm talking to leaders is like, when do you start being interested in teamwork? Is when you start managing people. Then you're like, oh, I want everyone to stop being jerks to each other, or quit coming to complain to me. Like, work together, work it out, figure it out. um, so again, it's hard to work in teams, and today it's like people are separated by time and space. We're on Zoom, we're on Slack, we're using all these great technology tools, but it's making us more and more disconnected. The world, in for the most part, for better, in my opinion, is way more diverse, and so we're dealing with people of different ages and races and backgrounds, and it's like, so there's a lot of things that make it difficult. And then a lot of times, what gets rewarded is individual performance. And so one of the distinctions, Jay, that I talk about in my book, We're All in This Together, and I talk about this more generally, is that there's a difference between our role and our job. Our role is what we do functionally, right? And our job is to help the team win. So on a high performing team, everybody has the same job, and that is to help the team win. The role is, again, and not that we're not interested in doing our roles well, but if we put our role above our job, now people are, it's mine, it's me, it's this. Even at a senior most level, it's like, I'm the chief revenue officer, I'm the chief financial. Okay, well, like, yeah, but this is a company. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, hey, we sold a bunch of stuff, but like the company's still struggling. Or hey, I'm the chief product officer and our products are awesome, but nobody's buying that. You know what I mean? So it's like we're trying to help the team win collectively. And that's where a lot of teams fall. And it's challenging. If you're 7 levels down from the CEO in a company or further, it's hard to have visibility into what are we actually trying to accomplish collectively. I'm just focused on the day-to-day, what's in front of me, what's in my inbox. But that's a sign of a real high-performing team, when we can elevate to really think more globally what's happening and how is what I'm doing individually contributing to that success.
Mike, I think that the way you described the challenge is due to what I see as environmentally, we're really programmed in some ways to be more ego focused, like
Yes.
egocentric, right?
Yep.
In today's world, more than ever. And it's not to throw shade on individualism.
No.
I don't mean to. And I don't mean to suggest that people shouldn't be taking care of themselves or prioritizing themselves. But I do think that our society has, in a way, pushed us more towards self-absorption, which is I
Yep.
have to just think about me and what I get out of this, because that's
Mm-hmm.
how, as you said, we get rewarded quite often.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is, Mike, not only does it affect the team performance, but it also leaves you less happy and fulfilled. Like, in other words, if I only focus on me and I just make everything about me, I'm more likely to be dissatisfied and unfulfilled than if I work with others and I connect and I'm able to achieve something that we're all mutually aligned towards.
Totally. And look, it's tricky because we're always having to balance it. And look, at some level, we do have to. I mean, there's all these cliches, but they're cliches because they're true. Like, you got to put your own oxygen mask on first, right? You got to make sure, like, if my boat sinks, I can't help anybody else. So, like, focusing on ourselves, making sure we take care of ourselves, paying ourselves first, all these things that we know about, those things aren't inherently selfish or egotistical. However, if we get obsessed with only me and mine and what's in it for me, it makes it difficult to create an environment of collaboration. And one of the things I often say to people when we're talking about this is, like, look, there's a lot of paradox, but I say, okay, let's just say you're super selfish and you literally do not care about anyone else. You're not interested in anyone else's success, just your own. It's actually always in our best interest to be on a successful team, a high performing team, a winning team, right? Because just using sports as an analogy, you take two athletes, professional athletes in any sport. Let's say you and I are both, professional, basketball players. And let's say we have the same talent level, but let's say you're on, the Golden State Warriors and they win several championships, and I'm on the, Atlanta Hawks and we don't get to the playoffs, or we get knocked out in the first round. Who's more valuable? You
Of
are,
course,
because
I am. Yeah.
hey, this guy played for the Warriors. He was on a bunch of championship teams. He's been around Steph Curry. He knows how to win. You're going to sign a better contract than me, even though I might even actually have better skills than you, but they're going to want you because, hey, that guy knows how to win. And the same is true, by the way, in business. Even inside of a company, you work inside a big corporation. It's like you work for a team inside the company that's doing well, or the company as a whole is doing well. You're more valuable internally. You're much more valuable externally. Like, hey, Jay worked for Google, or he worked for, Tesla, or he worked, whatever, fill in the blank, the company some company that's doing well, that's got a good reputation for both performance and for culture. Now, all of a sudden it's like, hey, he worked at Netflix, or, worked at, fill in the blank, uh, Starbucks or whatever, some company. Now, all of a sudden it's like, hey, the fact that the company did well, or that the team did well, benefited me, not just because the stock went up and my portfolio. I mean, there's all of that. But again, if we're on a mediocre team or a struggling team, even if we're doing well, we're less valuable in the marketplace. And again, being able to build something and create something and accomplish something together, most humans that I talk to, when I say, tell me about the best team you've ever been a part of, they'll think of some time that they were with a group of people that they cared about, that they were up to something that mattered to them, and they had some kind of collective success. When I talk to my buddies that I played ball with, my Stanford buddies, again, like I said, we're on a group chat and we're constantly texting about, weird stuff and sports stuff, and guys are giving each other grief and whatever. But when we get real and get together and we talk about what we don't miss, sitting in the dugout or working out or the game. We miss being together. We miss having something that we were trying to accomplish, something that was hard, something that we failed at times, because baseball's full of failure, but something that we succeeded at times. And the memories that we have are less about, remember that time I did that awesome thing. It's more about, remember that time we had that collective experience that was either great or really awful, but we did it together. And it was cool that we now have that collective story.
Yeah, or even if it is something that you did, it was something that you did as an individual that contributed towards the team's success, right? Which is
Totally.
something we all celebrated together. And
Yes.
I really like this perspective quite a bit, because even if you are listening to this and you're thinking, yeah, but I really do need to focus on me here, like I'm not where I want to be, and hey, if that's your situation right now,
Yep.
that's what it is. But what Mike is sharing, and I completely agree with, is even if that's the case, you're still going to benefit more if you drop your own ego and you contribute towards a team's success and don't
Yep.
make it about just you. So
Yep.
so that's an example, I think, of what an individual can do and how to break down some silos.
Yep.
Talk to me a little bit more about what you find that really works. Like, for example, in that story with Cindy,
Mm-hmm.
that's what she's experiencing. As an executive leader,
Right.
she's seeing silos within her team. People are not collaborating. How
Right.
do you encourage leaders to break down those silos in a genuine way where people get really bought in?
It's tricky, right? I mean, the Cindy story I think is a good one because I see that type of thing happen all the time. And again, remember, culture is a dynamic thing. It's not something static. It's not like we set the culture, we've got it, and it's good. No, things happen. People get upset. People get weird. Business goes up. It goes down. Someone does something. Someone does something that we can't trust, or people get, and like again, the more senior you get, the harder it can be sometimes to really hear the truth of what's going on because people give you a filtered version of it. So when I'm working with people like Cindy who are at the C-suite level, a lot of times the work that I'm doing with them when I'm coaching them individually or I'm working with a senior leadership team is like, first and foremost, we got to look in the mirror, like, what might I be doing that's contributing to this? Not to blame yourself, but it's about taking some ownership and some responsibility. And like, a big thing that can shift the dynamic of relationships and of culture ultimately, Jay, in my experience, is leaders who are willing to be authentic. And when I say authentic, the way I describe authenticity is that it's removing our self-righteousness and adding vulnerability to our honesty. So someone like Cindy might also be interested in, even though it can be a little scary, to like, how do I sit with some of the individuals on the team or even with the team as a whole and kind of lower the waterline on the iceberg a bit, meaning share a little bit more about what I'm thinking and how I'm feeling and what's going on. Like, hey, talk a little bit about things that you might be worried about. Or, I often like to say to people, when you're concerned about something, a good way to say it to another human or a group of humans is like, hey, the story I'm telling myself is, and then you just say whatever the thing is, that like people don't trust each other or they're silos or people don't trust me anymore or something got broken. I don't know how to fix it or whatever. And as messy as that can be and as scary as that can be, it's like trust can get rebuilt. But at some level, we have to acknowledge the challenge or the difficulty that may have resulted in the trust being broken, and doing that doesn't make it worse. It's like, this is a terrible and kind of intense analogy, but like in psychology, we've learned now that like if someone's suicidal, talking to them about them being suicidal doesn't make them more likely to kill themselves. It actually makes them less likely to if you get in dialogue. But we're so scared to have that conversation because it's
Yeah.
literally life and death that we don't do it, or we're afraid, or we don't. The conventional wisdom is if I bring it up, they're more likely to do it. Ironically and sadly, that's not the case. But the same is true in something less intense when it's like, I don't want to talk about the issue because it's going to make the issue worse. 99 times out of 100, it doesn't. It usually
Right.
makes it better if we at least acknowledge the elephant in the room. We may not have the answer. We may not know how to solve it, but let's at least bring it into the room and talk about it, because it's the avoidance of it that usually makes things worse.
Yeah. We were using sports analogies a bit earlier. It's like, you get an injury on the field or on the court, you have to address the injury. Like otherwise, if you got to just
Right.
keep going back out to the field and keep playing through it, it's going to get worse and worse unless you
Right.
directly address the injury. And the same thing goes with a team dynamic, is what I'm hearing
Yep.
you say. It needs to be addressed directly, and it requires
Yeah,
courage to do that.
it does. And there's different ways to approach it. And again, you don't have to have the conversation instantaneously and with everyone at once. And sometimes, again, for someone like Cindy, there's also the element of where this is also important. And whether you're a COO like she is, or you're a leader at a different level, the relationships with your peers are really important, as well as your own manager. Because maybe, let's say, again, using Cindy as an example, hey, I'm having issues with the team, or it seems like there's some silos, or there's some cracks in the trust, or people aren't speaking up as much. Okay, before I go and have an intervention with the team, maybe I start with my peers or one of my peers who maybe, hey, have you ever dealt with this? I'm struggling with this. What do you think? Or maybe I go to my boss. So I'm assuming, Cindy's boss is probably the CEO. Hey, can I talk to you about this? Or a mentor or a coach. And then maybe you bring it initially to, when you're a senior leader, you're going to have a group of direct reports, right? But then there's going to be layers on down. And so you can be mindful without being overly strategic in an inauthentic way. Who am I talking to about this, and how do we address this most effectively? But I find that where leaders run into trouble is trying to solve it all themselves, trying to figure it out in their heads, as opposed to getting into conversation with other people who can potentially really help them see different perspectives.
Yeah. And what I also heard you say before, Mike, which is where you started, was encouraging someone like Cindy to take ownership
Yeah.
and really understand what is the role she's playing
Yeah.
in why in the fact that there's silos. Because as a leader, if you just start looking outward, you're missing the most important step, the first step.
Right.
And I heard from you, and something I saw of one of your videos, you have an equation for authenticity, and you touched
Yep.
on it a little bit. And I
Yep.
wanted you to, if you could, just explain that a bit, because I thought it was really valuable when I heard it. What is the authenticity equation?
So the authenticity equation is it's honesty minus self-righteousness plus vulnerability. That's authenticity. So we have to start with honesty, but we have to remove our self-righteousness and we have to add vulnerability. And that's how we actually get to authenticity. So again, like in Cindy's case, I don't know Cindy obviously, but using that example, it's like starting with what's true, what's real, what's honest for her about the situation, and then removing the self-righteousness. Self-righteousness is usually all of our judgments and like, that's wrong and that's bad and that person's an idiot and this shouldn't be and I'm right and okay, you can have all those feelings and opinions, but can you take it out of the self-righteous place and just go, okay, this is how I'm seeing it? And then the vulnerability is kind of, as I've mentioned earlier, it's like lowering the waterline on the iceberg. How are you feeling about this? Oh, I feel frustrated. I feel helpless or powerless, or I don't know what's going on, or did I screw something or whatever. I'm just making stuff up. But it's like, that's where you can start really kind of taking a look in the mirror and taking some ownership. Remember, ownership doesn't mean blame. It doesn't mean it's your fault. But what it does mean, especially as a leader, right? It's like realizing, wait a minute, these people are showing up and they're humans, they're adults, they're responsible for their actions, but in response to my leadership, for better or for worse. So if we're going to take credit when the team does great, we also have to take some responsibility when the team struggles. And it's not 100% up to us, but as leaders, you do have quite a bit of influence on the team one way or the other.
Yeah, and I think that it taking inventory of this is not necessarily an act of judgment, like harsh judgment,
Right.
because no one's waking up in the morning, Mike, and saying to themselves, I want to be a terrible leader. I want to be a harmful leader. I want to make a bad impact, right? Cindy
No.
included, everybody listening, right?
Right.
And there's only so much that you're going to be aware of, because you're just operating from your one vantage point.
Right.
At times, right, you get feedback, you get data, you then recognize, okay, the way in which I'm behaving is leading to this impact. There are some adjustments that I need to make. And I think, and I think this is what I'm hearing from you too, which is it's one of the most important qualities of an effective leader is the ability to take that first, to have that awareness, and then to take that ownership.
Yep. Totally. I was, years ago, I was talking to a mentor of mine and I was complaining to her about a bunch of people who were bugging me, getting on my nerves, and this person bugging me, never. And she said to me after she listened to me rant for a few minutes, she's like, okay, Mike, I understand you're frustrated. She said, but I have a really important question to ask you. I said, what's that? She said, who's always at the scene of the crime? I said, what? She said, who's the common denominator in all those relationships and situations you were just complaining about? I was like, me? She said, yeah, you keep thinking if this person changed and that person was different and this situation was a little bit different, then everything would work out. She said, it doesn't work that way. In fact, it works the other way around. She said to me, nothing changes until you do. And it wasn't like I'd never heard that phrase before or that concept, but it really struck me. And I was actually working on a book at the time, which I ended up using as the title of the book. But really it's about, and that book is about mindset. It's about ownership. It's about really kind of how we deal with change and how we approach things and how we relate to ourselves. But one of the paradoxes, as we were talking earlier about teams, like it's okay to have an ego. It's okay to want to do well individually, but we also want to be mindful of what's happening on the team. As a leader, the paradox is often, yes, you want to put your attention on others. You want to make sure you're focused on others and being of service to them. And at the same time, we've got to take ownership and responsibility ourselves. Like the hardest part of being a leader, I think, is actually doing the inner work necessary to be able to show up for others authentically and effectively. When we
Yeah.
don't do the inner work, we end up just projecting a bunch of stuff onto everyone and then complaining, why are they all idiots? How come people aren't working hard enough? What's the matter? And we don't realize, like, yes, there may be some truth to our judgments, but ultimately, again, we're always at the scene of the crime. And part of leadership is taking that level of ownership. Not that you can control everyone and manipulate them, but your job is to influence them. And if you're not doing that, if you make it about them, you got no power as a leader. If you make it about you, not in a selfish way, but like, I can do something or say something different. And sometimes it's even coming to the team or an individual on the team and saying, I don't know exactly what to do here. Like I'm at a loss. I can't figure out how to motivate you. I don't know what the hell's going on. I'm doing the best I can and it's not working. Help me, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking about a time when I was a new manager and I went out to this manager training in Las Vegas
Mhm.
years ago. And, I have 12 members of my team, and I'm there as a new manager. And I'm like, yeah, they're not performing at the level that I was hoping for. It's like, why aren't they doing this? When I was in the role, I used to do it like that. And,
Of course.
the person who was facilitating, he's like, well, it sounds like what you want is 12 J Abbasis to be under you. Is that what you have? And I was like, well, I guess it's one way of looking at it. I guess that's what it's projecting that, right?
Right.
Why don't I have 12 Jay Abbasis? No, I have 12 different people, different motivations, different levels of talent, and different ways in which they approach their own businesses, because these were salespeople.
Right.
And I really got a lot from that, which is to suspend my own belief in what it should look like, and instead to look at people exactly as they are and work with them with how they're currently performing, and then serve them the best way I can.
Yeah. And that, I mean, what's great about that, I'm glad you got that feedback and it can be humbling. I mean, and that's a perfect example. A lot of times, and it sounds like you had this, take the example, successful salesperson, you're moving along, they promote you. Now you're going to be a sales manager. And you're like, great. And then you're like, what's wrong with these salespeople? Why aren't they selling like me? And then you sort of start telling them what to do and elbowing them out of the way and do it like this and do it like that. And then they're like, you're annoying and you're micromanaging. And what do you do? And then you realize like, oh, there's a whole different set of skills involved in coaching people than doing the job. And not that both are valuable, they're just different. And a lot of times great salespeople don't necessarily make great sales managers because it's a
Yeah.
different set of skills. The same thing with like great athletes aren't always the best coaches. That's why I'm always impressed when there's someone who was really good at the sport and then they end up being really good as a coach, because it's like, wow, those are two different skills. And it takes quite a bit to develop the skill of coaching, even if you're really good at whatever the activity is.
Yeah. I think that mistake gets made too often, where
Yep.
people just make that assumption that someone who was a top performer as an individual contributor would then automatically make a good manager. That's
Right.
another conversation for another time.
Yeah.
What you touched on, I wanted to be sure we discussed a bit here, was change, because
Yes.
you have an interesting perspective on change. And I think that in Cindy's case, and so often the stories that I hear are because there's so much change, it's creating this isolation. People
Yep.
are freaking out. So, Mike, talk to me about how you encourage people to interpret change and to respond to change.
Well, a couple things. I mean, first of all, we're living through a massive amount of change right now. I mean, the last 5 years have been insane in terms of how much has changed in the world. And you think of COVID and, virtual, all the things and technology. And then here we are now with so much uncertainty and so much going on politically, socially, economically, otherwise. But then, artificial intelligence and everything. And all we're reading and hearing about from everybody is like, everything's going to change. It's all going to be different. And we don't even know exactly what that means. But suffice to say, from what I can tell, and the people that are a lot smarter than me, there's a massive amount of change coming. And we've been through a massive amount of change. So I just think understanding how we operate in change, being able to lead through change and just live through change is something that we all need to be able to do as well as possible. And it's hard because especially when the changes are new and different and we've never dealt with them before, it's like, there's no playbook for this. And it feels like to me, the last 5 years have been a lot of that. I'm assuming the next 5 or 10 and however long are going to be a lot of that. That said, it's important to remember that most of us as human beings seek and fear change at the same time. We want to change. We're excited to change. Like everyone listening to or watching us right now, you're interested in your own growth and development. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to this. So that's saying, I want change. However, change often comes in a lot of different ways, and we don't always ask for it. We don't always get it the way that we want it. And as leaders inside of organizations, it's often the company's reorging, or we're doing this new strategy, or boom, and you don't have any say in it. You just have to deal with it yourself and then go implement it and try to lead other people through it. So much, there's the practical part of change, which can be complicated, but the emotional part of change is always way harder. And
Yeah.
so again, just telling the truth, like, how do I feel about change? How do I respond to change? What are the mechanisms within me? How does my stress manifest itself? And even talking to your team about it, like having some awareness of ourselves and each other. There's not a right way and a wrong way to go through change, but there's definitely ways that can be more effective and less effective. And part of what we got to be able to do is embrace it, talk about it, be able to kind of lower the waterline on the iceberg, if you will, as we're going through it, so we can support each other as best as possible.
Yeah. What I think creates so much of that disruption, Mike, is that there is this desire to control the change.
Yeah.
And I like the way you described it, which is we're seeking fame and we're seeking change and we're fearful of change at the
Yeah.
same time. So the change that we seek is the change that we think that are on our terms and we control it, right? And we
Yeah.
fear the change that is outside of our control.
Yeah.
So would it then require us to learn how to let go a bit of that control?
Absolutely. I mean, I had an old baseball coach that used to always say to us, there's only two things in life you can control: your attitude and your effort. And he would say it so often we would roll our eyes, but he was pretty much right. Like,
Yeah.
we can control our attitude, which is our perspective, our mindset, how we approach something. We control our effort, which is our actions, our behaviors. But most of everything else is like, we can't control the economy, the weather. We can't even control the people closest to us, right? Like my wife, Michelle, and I have two teenage daughters who are 19 and 17. I have zero control. I mean, like, I try to influence, but forget about it. Like, do you know what I mean? And whether it was when they were toddlers or now, it's just like, oh my God, what's going on here? You know, and I will sometimes even say to them, you know, people pay your dad money to listen to him talk. And they're like rolling their eyes and going, my younger one, Rosie, at one point said, Dad, you're only inspiring when people pay you. And I was like, hey, hold on a second. But what I'm saying is, like, it's important to remember there's limits to our control, and we erroneously think we can control things that we can't. And that's what creates a lot of stress. There's a great quote from an author and philosopher named Byron Katie that I love. She says, when you argue with reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time. And that's often what we're doing, is saying it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be, but it is. So what are we going to do about it? Right?
It's so, I love that quote by Byron Katie.
Yeah.
And in that word, I often bring to people's attention that should word. I always tell people, if you are saying or thinking the word should or shouldn't, you're
Yep.
already on the wrong path. You're already in a
Yep.
state of resistance. It
Yep.
is as it is. It doesn't mean you resign to it. You can still respond to it, but it
Right.
needs to begin with an acceptance of what is. So, Mike,
Yes.
let's assume this scenario, because Cindy, she's going through a lot right now. She's struggling with her team.
Yep.
And let's assume she attended a conference and you were the keynote speaker there. And she comes up to you after that, you get off the stage, and she tells you her story, what she's going through, Mike. And you listen, you acknowledge what she's working through, and you want to pose a question to get her to think a little differently, to get her to maybe have a shift in perspective. What would you ask her, Mike, in that moment?
I think that actually there would be three questions I'd want to know. The first question I would ask her is, how do you feel about what's going on? And just see what she said. Because there's no
Yeah.
right or wrong way to feel, but just get her present into how she actually feels herself. Like, how are you feeling about this right now? My assumption is she's probably feeling frustrated or annoyed, or, you know, maybe self-critical. I don't know, but just that would be the first question. Because that, if I asked her that question, she'd probably hopefully lower the waterline a little bit. Now we start to have a little bit more of a more authentic conversation. So how do you feel? The second question I would ask is, what have you already tried that maybe hasn't worked, or what have you attempted to do to address this? Just so we get into some sense of, like I always say, let's start with acceptance. Like, what have I tried? What hasn't worked? No judgment, but just, and then the third question, and this is kind of a one that I like to ask and I use sometimes in coaching, is, if you were coaching you about this situation, what would you say? Right? If someone else came to you with this problem or this situation, because what that does, that allows us to, it's kind of like the role play sometimes we do, like with our spouse. It's like, pretend to be them and then talk to you. It's all of a sudden, it puts you in a different, like if you were coaching you in
Yeah.
this scenario, what would you say? And then she probably has some wisdom about what could help. And then from there, after asking those three questions and hearing what she had to say, If she didn't already solve some of it herself, then I might offer something in response to that. But
Yeah.
I also come from, I'm glad you asked me to what question I would ask, because as much as I sometimes can jump right into problem solving mode, I try to come from the perspective of most people have the answers somewhere inside of them. It's just about us helping them, sort of harvest them.
Absolutely. And that third question, that's such a great way to frame it, because it then helps the person to get out of the first person and
Yeah.
into a third person or second
Mm-hmm.
person, which is, there's pretty fascinating studies on this. And they show that the brain will actually be able to activate more areas just by getting out of I and me and into, well, I'd say to her or him or them. It
Right.
just, you have more capacity for problem solving just when
Totally.
you're not only in your own clouds, surrounded by your own stuff.
Well, it's also
Yeah.
why we're so good at giving other people advice. I always joke, it's like, don't you notice other people's problems are way easier to solve than our own? Because yeah, it's like, hey Jay, let me tell you what to do with your business and your family and your relationship. I mean, it's like, but then on me, oh gosh, now I'm like stuck in, but if it's someone else, and that's the hard part, if we can play that trick on ourselves to make our issue a more external one. Imagine I'm coaching this person with this situation. We probably would actually have some insight and wisdom to share that could be useful.
Absolutely. And Mike, talk about wisdom and insight. I got a lot from this conversation, my friend. So thank you so much. And I'm sure our listeners did as well. For anyone listening, if you want to look up the work that Mike is doing, from his talks to his books, check out his website, mike-robbins.com, MIKE-ROBBINS.com. We'll put that in the show notes as well. And I know that you're active on social. That's how we met, via LinkedIn. Mike, thank you so much, man, for taking time out of your day to chat with me.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate the conversation.
I really enjoyed speaking with Mike. Very easy to talk to. It's very natural conversation. And I'll do my best to break it down into 3 insights, 3 actionable takeaways. Here we go. First insight: everything comes down to people and relationships. If you're not where you want to be, you're feeling stuck, oftentimes the people you're around are the people who either lift you up or could bring you down, but you have to be intentional about those relationships. Your support system, your friends, your family, your team. If you're working in a corporate environment, there needs to be a heavy focus on those relationships for things to improve and get better. Second insight: teamwork is hard. I appreciated how honest he was about it. No one gives us a manual. Really, like, we're always rewarded for individualism. But if you really consider the best experiences, and he brought up how when he thinks about his baseball career, it's those moments where he celebrated with his teammates, where they did things collectively, that was the most meaningful. And I agree with him. When your team wins, you win. Third insight: when you argue with reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time. It's a quote by Byron Katie. I love that he referenced that quote. It's so true. We need to be able to accept reality, accept things as they are. It doesn't mean we resign to them. We can take action to improve things, but we have to start by accepting things as they are. Actionable takeaways. First one: take ownership. Take ownership in any of it. In the case with Cindy, how is she contributing towards her team dynamics? Maybe it's because she's not speaking up and she's not addressing things. She needs to share her concern. If there's anything that's going wrong with the team, ask yourself, what do I need to do differently? What do I need to take ownership of? And if it requires having some of those conversations, sharing how you feel. I like the phrase of the story I'm telling myself is, as a way to get out of it being so emotionally triggering. Use that kind of language to be able to communicate to others if there's something that's not working amongst the team. Second actionable takeaway: the authenticity equation. The equation is honesty minus self-righteousness plus vulnerability equals authenticity. Honesty, you have to start with being truthful, but you remove the self-righteousness, remove that sense of judgment of others, and then add that vulnerability. Add that ability to just share what's really going on without, let's say, oversharing, but to be able to really talk about your feelings. Then you're being your authentic self. Third actionable takeaway: if you were coaching you, what would you say? bring that question up to yourself. If I were coaching another person who's dealing with this, what would I tell them? How would I help them to work through it? Use that as a means to be able to get out of your own stuff and be able to look at things much more objectively. Now, join us on Friday. I'm going to give you a framework. It's a framework that I've used in workshops and keynotes to be able to help people communicate when there are breakdowns within team dynamics. How do you address something? How do you give that kind of feedback? How are you able to, especially when it's getting really sensitive, what is the talk track? What is the way in which you communicate it without becoming too emotional or without sounding like a robot either, to be able to really engage someone if there is some conflict? So I'm going to walk you through that step by step. This is the kind of thing I've shared, as I mentioned, in workshops, keynotes. I've worked with people one-on-one. I've seen it used in organizations that I've worked closely with, and I've seen great results whenever people apply it. You see great results, team dynamics improve. So you don't want to miss that on Friday. Also, remember, please submit your story to us if you're working through a challenge right now where you're feeling stuck. We will talk through it. An expert guest and I will highlight that story. We'll feature it for you. And if you'd like to stay anonymous, you can. That's your choice, up to you. So until next time, thank you so much for listening.